So because we're using a contact switch that's mounted onto the rocking chair itself, we need to make sure that the rocking chair is in the same position every time, and you can see there's quite a bit of play in it, and this has always been kind of a pain to move around. So what I decided to do was drill a couple of holes, one here and one on the other side on the bottom of the rocker, and put a steel spacer in with a washer, put a 1/4 inch bolt through. This goes through the clevis pin on the other side. I'll put a couple of washers in there, and then put a lock nut on the end. Now this will allow the rocking chair to stay put no matter what, and it will also allow me to pick up the rocking chair without damaging any of the components back here. Now you can't just put this in and fire it up and expect that this is going to work correctly. It actually won't. The reason why is because once you secure this, this is the new pivot point. The only way for this to work is if I raise these clevis pins up about a 1/2 inch, and I determined that by looking at how much these rose and fell before hitting the plywood bottom. So the next step is going to be to drill my holes through, mount everything, but I'm going to have to raise this up about a 1/2 inch, which means the chair is going to come up about a 1/2 inch, but it will stay perfectly in place every time. I'll actually have a smoother rocking motion. That's my theory, at least. Let's see if it works. So I'm just turning the rocking chair on right now, and I'm kind of looking at how much strain is put on the motor. And I can tell that there's a lot of torque right here, which tells me I need to move this forward a bit. So I've taken some measurements. I put a little mark where the bottom of the rocker hits at its furthest point back and then the furthest point forward, and just divide it in half and called that my center point. Then I confirm this by positioning the wiper motor so that the axle is completely parallel with the plywood. So I'm just going to use a hobby craft square to transfer my line here. Just using a pencil. To get the most strength out of this, I'm going to drill the holes halfway. This is about 1 1/4 inches, so I'm going to go about 5/8 inches up. Now, because this will not fit in my drill press, nor would you want to use a drill press, I'm just going to make a little jig. I've glued 2 blocks together, and I will drill a hole 5/8 inches up on the drill press. Then I will transfer my mark all the way around so I can line it up with my mark here, and I can use a hand drill, and this is a guide to drill through. That way I make sure that the hole is perpendicular to the angle of the rung, because these are not 90 degrees to the board. All right, so I've marked my top so it's clear. I'm going to transfer my line. So there is a slight taper to the leg right here, but I don't want to clamp it with the taper. It's not necessary. I do want to keep it parallel with the plywood because that is how the motor is mounted. You always want to start with a very small bit and work your way up. It's going to give you a much more accurate hole. But if I were to go straight to a 3/8 inch bit, this thing could wind up all over the place. So now I'll go up to 1 drill bit size. Okay, so I got one bracket installed. Now I'm just going to install the other bracket. So I just picked up the stuff at Lowe's. This is a 1/4 inch by 3/8 by 1 inch steel spacer. Then I have a 1.5 inch long 1/4 inch bolt, 1/4 inch lock nut. So I'm going to put a washer on the bolt. Put the spacer in here. Then one washer. And I tried it with 2 washers on the other side, but it just barely gave me enough bite on that lock nut. So the other washer really isn't necessary since these are all accurate to the size of the clevis pin hole. So I have to raise up the rocking chair just a little bit here. Tighten this down. I'm going to double check that my chair is still square and then just temporarily secure it so we can test it out. I'm just going to put some temporary screws through the clevis bracket just so we can test our proof of concept here. And then if it works, I'll probably end up putting small bolts completely through the plywood because it's only 1/2 inch plywood, so I don't really have a lot of bite on the screw. It's pretty strong, but you don't want to be doing a repair at the last minute. So the rocking chair is raised up about, it's a little more than 1/4 of an inch. I don't think that's going to be enough, but we'll test it out. If it's not enough, then, and this is another reason to use bolts, I'll just put some washers in as spacers and then we can just keep checking it. Yeah, so it definitely binds up right there. Forward movement's good, just the backward movement needs a little more space, so I'll raise that up and we'll try it again. Alright, so I know I said I did not want to do this, but I put some spacers in and it just seems too high to me, so I'm just going to be forced to raise up my motor, but no big deal. Let's get these out. So you can kind of see how I had mounted this on here. This is just all aluminum angle stock. Not my best work, but so the silver lining in this is that I can clamp a scrap piece of wood to this piece of wood right here and reposition this as needed to kind of fine-tune the mechanism. I tried adjusting this bolt here to lower this, but I could only get like maybe 1/4 of an inch out of it, so I think raising this is really gonna help solve my problem. Okay, so I've raised the motor up about 1.5 inches, and then I had to shim this side of the rocking chair up just slightly, and I just used 2 small washers because it was slightly out of balance. And now it is working perfectly. I love it because it actually squeaks like a rocking chair. Now hopefully you can see how perfect that is. It's not touching anywhere, so there's no strain on the motor. I'm going to put a project box right here. Actually, I already bought one. It's just a large junction box from Home Depot. A lot cheaper than a project box, actually. And once I have that in place, I'll put all the components in, do all my soldering. I'll shoot this with a little flat black spray paint, and should be all ready to go. Okay, so I cut a little notch out for my wiring to go into. Yeah, see my right wrist? I also cut a little notch out of my hand with the hole saw. Careful, kids. And I also found this cord that actually has a quick disconnect. I have a bin full of like electric wire and outlets and all kinds of different stuff. I just save everything because you never know when you might need it. So I figured I would wire it directly in here. I just used a drill to drill 2 holes and then a file to get the right profile. So now this just slides right in. I'll hot glue gun it in place. That way when it's hooked up here with all the components inside, to get it power, all I have to do is take this, plug it in, and then plug this side in to an extension cord. Okay, so I finished my project box. I mounted an outlet in here, and then also a momentary switch. That's how I will trigger the prop. I added the momentary switch just to trigger the prop for demo purposes and to film it. I'll go back and add another trigger later on, like a motion sensor or a step pad. I'm not going to hard mount the picavolt in the box. I just have some Velcro on the back, so I'll just stick it to the bottom just in case I need to pull it up and make any adjustments. But all my wiring is done, so I'm going to go ahead and wire everything up and then we'll test it out. Here is a close-up of that contact switch I made. So that's the animation of the prop. Okay, so I just got a little red spotlight on her, and I will set her off by hitting the momentary switch. So I also have a black light on, and you can see that the little ruffles around her collar and her sleeves are glowing, and you can also see that her eyes are glowing, and that's because the hot glue that I used is UV reactive. But watch as the prop comes on, you'll see them light up. So it's hard to film. It looks way better in person, naturally. So I'll probably fine-tune the animation just a little bit, but I'm really pleased with the way this prop turned out, and it only took me 3 years.